All right, we're going to continue tracking along with these Torah portions, but this is going to be a little different. We're actually not even going to read out of this portion at all. I'm looking back through my notes. But I want to talk about really what the essence of this portion is, the heart of it. The title is Teitzei, and it means when you go out. And so in reading this portion, what you will see, and my strong suggestion to you is if you haven't read it, to read it, because the things that I'm saying to you will connect later. Take some time today and do that. As you read this portion, according to Jewish scholars, there are 73 commandments in this portion. It's one of the portions that contain the largest quantities of commandments. 26 of them are performative, in other words, something you should do. 47 are prohibitive, something you should refrain from doing. Of these 73 commandments, approximately 50 of them, or roughly 2/3, are commandments dealing with loving your neighbor. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what does it take to love your neighbor. Out of the 10 commandments given to Israel at Mount Sinai, 6 of them are love your neighbor commandments. 4 of them directly related to the Father. The other 6 to loving your neighbor. To me, one of the most beneficial aspects, I don't need this yet, of the Torah is that it really helps us understand. It really helps us, and to be frank, all of Scripture does this. It tells us exactly how the Father wants to be loved by us. And it tells us exactly how we're supposed to love the neighbor that we see. Apart from Scripture, we see this repeated pattern that Scripture tells us about, and that is that man does whatever is right in his own eyes. What's interesting is every time man does that, man falls short. Whether it was prior to the nation of Israel or post the nation of Israel, it seems a repeated cycle that when man does what is right in his own eyes, it always falls short of what the Father thinks. So we're going to consider together today what it means to love your neighbor. Let's go to Matthew 22 and we'll start there. We're going to cover some scriptures and let the Bible tell us what we need to know. Matthew 22, picking up in verse 34. But the Pharisees, having heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, were gathered together. And one of them, one learned in the Torah, did question, trying him and saying, "Teacher, which is the greatest, or which is the great command in the Torah?" And Yeshua said to him, "You shall love your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment." And Yeshua goes on and he says, "The second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commands hang all the Torah and the prophets." So we have the greatest command, and what he says is the second greatest command, and the second one is just like the first one. And he says, on these 2 commands hang all the Torah and the prophets. Now, this word hang is a crazy long word in Greek, and I didn't even write it down because I didn't want to look like a buffoon trying to pronounce it. But I want to read to you the definition of this word. It means to hang up or to suspend or hang. It's used to describe in the book of Deuteronomy when it says cursed is a man who hangs on a tree. It's the same word used to describe hanging on the cross. And so I'm just reading you the definitions. I didn't manipulate these in any way. Use of the law and prophets is summed up or hanging on 2 precepts. The Vine's dictionary says this, and this gets a little wordy, but intransitively, in the middle voice, in Matthew 22:40, this word speaks of the dependence of the law and prophets, for example, that which they enjoin, upon the one great principle of love to God and one's neighbor, as a door hangs on a hinge, or as articles hang on a nail. It's something to consider. If all of Scripture and all of the prophets, basically everything that they had to this point that they considered the Bible, as we call the Bible today, right? They didn't have Matthew to Revelation. But Yeshua is saying all of them hang on these two principles. I think the door is a great example, because a door is a door, whether it's hanging on hinges or not, right? So Scripture is still Scripture, but its functionality, right? The functionality of a door doesn't happen until it's hung on hinges. Once it's hanging, then it has function. Likewise, when you take a door and you hang it on hinges, the door didn't disappear, right? It's still there. It just found purpose in how it should function. When clothes are hung on a nail, they don't fall to the ground, become filthy and wrinkled. And I think in there we can understand the purpose. If the Scriptures aren't built on these precepts, and if we're not using them according to those precepts, we can tarnish the Scriptures. If we're not using the Scriptures for the function and purpose of loving God and loving our neighbor, we're missing the point of them. So likewise, if we are only trying to fulfill any command without being pursuant to, in the essence of, or without the heart of love, it's impossible. It's impossible to obey any commandment given to the Father, whether it's found in here or one the Spirit brought to your heart in personal relationship, without love as the foundation of it. Follow me so far? So, in other words, the commandments without love don't function properly. They become misused and abused. And we've seen that down through history. Yeshua, in one of his arguments against Pharisaic doctrine, was that they were putting weight on men that was not easy to bear, because they were taking the commandments of God and bringing them to their own purpose. And he goes on to talk about how they took their own traditions and elevated them above and made the commands of no effect, right? So we see, and we've seen this down the ages all along. Why? Because man falls into the trap of doing what is right in their own eyes. We see that happening. And I don't know, it was a few months ago we were talking about the necessity, right? James talks about true religion as taking care of widows and orphans, right? What does that look like? If we don't have rules to follow, who qualifies? Who doesn't qualify? How do we go about doing it? If we don't have some set of system for that, and Paul talks clearly about that. If it's a widow, we have responsibility once they reach a certain age. But if it's a young widow and you do too much for them, they're going to become lazy and just sit around. I mean, that's the paraphrase. So what I'm saying is, love can't be at the default of what we think love should look like. Because God is love, right? That is his essence. That is his nature. That is who he is. So everything that he's doing and everything that he's saying is a product of, or aspect of, or function of love. So when we do what he said or he's shown or we follow his will, the default setting should be love. What's crazy is to think that we can do it and not love at all. It's crazy to think that we could do some of these loving our neighbor things and have nothing but black in our hearts. We could do it for pride. We could do it for fame. We could do it for fortune. We could do all these things with ill motives and ill intentions. So the commandments by themselves can operate apart from love. But when they do, they're not fulfilling purpose. Right? We could take those doors back there off their hinges and we could just lean them in the opening. And they would function as a door. But it would be awful. But once they're on those hinges, man, they function so freely and beautifully. And the more they function on the hinges, the better the hinges work, right? You let them sit for a long time. You ever try to get in a car that sat for like 20, 30 years and you go to open the hinge and the door won't open because the hinge is rusted? So the more we operate in the things the Father wants us to and we do it by love, the more fluid love becomes in our lives. So not only is love the manner in which the commandments are to be lived, but it's also what each commandment constitutes as a whole. In other words, the sum of them all is love. The sum of all the commandments is love. Let's go to Romans 13. Romans 13. So the words of Paul as he's writing to the church in Rome. Picking up in verse 8, he says, "Owe no one any matter or anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has filled the Torah. For this, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. And if there is any other command, it is summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no evil to a neighbor. Therefore, love is completion of the Torah." Well, so there's three words that have to be discussed in here: filled, summed, completion. But we're not going to cover them in that order. I want to talk about the word summed first. I'm not going to tell you this Greek word because I don't even know if I could pronounce it. I don't even know why I wrote it down. It means to sum up or to gather up, to present as a whole. And I asked myself a question. Can a sum ever subtract? And so I thought about it for a little while, and we don't have any math teachers in here, do we? Is there a math teacher in the room? No, his wife's a math teacher. That doesn't mean he knows any math. I mean, come on. Let's just be honest. Can a sum ever be a subtraction? So I asked Google. I mean, I knew the answer, but, I didn't know if you would trust me because I'm not a math teacher. So I asked Google, and then I said, well, maybe they'll trust Google. This is what Google said. No. A sum, and they put it in quotes, which I thought was funny, itself cannot directly subtract, as a sum represents the result of adding numbers together. Right? When we do it in addition problem, we call it finding the sum. Right? You remember that? That's like second grade, I know. I mean, I don't know who's the youngest in here. Zachariah? That was a little while ago. Second grade, how old are you in second grade? I probably have a second grader right now. 7? Okay, so that's 33 years ago. But I still remember finding the sum is what you do in addition. So it's adding them all together. Well, I thought that was interesting. Finding the sum means adding them all together. So finding the love would be adding the commandments together. If a sum can't subtract, then saying love is the sum of them is saying we took them all, we added them together, and in the addition of them all, we got love. That says to me, if you leave one out, it's not love. It's not the sum, right? If we leave 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 or however many there are, it doesn't matter to me. The point is, if you don't take the sum, you don't get to love. Paul said it. Just saying. All right, so let's look at a few more of these. Let's talk about the word filled. This is one of my favorite words in Scripture because it gets kind of twisted a little bit. This word is pleru. I think some of you have heard of that word before. Pleru means to make full or to fill up. Oh, I need my computer now. I knew I needed it at some point. Now you got to bear with me. I don't use this often in this setting. Password. You can't trust everybody. All right, listen to this. I'm going to read 2 things from you. This is from the website Blue Letter Bible. How many of you use Blue Letter Bible at all, ever? It's great. So, outline of biblical usage of the word pleru. Roman numeral I, to make full, or 1, to fill up. For example, to fill to the full, to cause to abound, to furnish or supply liberally. I abound, I am liberally supplied. Roman numeral 2, to render full, for example, to complete. To fill to the top so that nothing shall be wanting, to full measure, full to the brim. To consummate a number, to make complete in every particular, to render perfect, to carry through to the end, to accomplish, carry out some undertaking. To carry into effect, bring to realization, to realize. Number 1, of matters of duty, to perform or to execute. Of sayings, promises, prophecies, to bring to pass, ratify, or accomplish. To fulfill, for example, to cause God's will is made known in the law to be obeyed as it should be, and God's promises given through the prophets to receive fulfillment. Interesting stuff, right? Now, I'm going to read you one other piece because have you ever heard of Thayer's Greek lexicon? Thayer's takes basically the biblical outline of usage and expands on all the places that it's used. And so, in the end of this is what it says. Universally and absolutely to fulfill. For example, to cause God's will as made known in the law to be obeyed as it should be, and God's promises given through the prophets to receive fulfillment. Now, in speaking in that manner, it references Matthew 5:17. Does anyone know Matthew 5:17? It starts with think not. Now, do you remember? All right, so it says, think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Now, so I think that's interesting. If the purpose of this word in this format is to cause God's will to be obeyed as it should, and God's promises to receive fulfillment, that seems like that's what Jesus did. Every argument Jesus had with a religious leader was over their manipulating God's law. Every one of them. On top of that, his life was lived in such a way that it fulfilled every prophecy that was spoken about him to that time. There's still some he's going to come and return and fulfill. Right? So it seems to me he's doing both of those pieces. But even more than that, let me give you a couple more examples. So when this word pleru is used in the Old Testament, the first two places it comes up is in creation. On day 5, when fish are made. And the Father says to the fish, fill the seas. Fill them. And then on day 6, when he makes man, he tells them to subdue the earth and to do what? Fill it. So when they filled the seas didn't go anywhere, right? When they filled the earth, as man was supposed to do, it didn't go anywhere. What's interesting is you can't find a single instance in Scripture where pleru is used as a removal. You just can't. In like terms, so another instance where it's used, Galatians 5:14, for the entire Torah is completed in one word. In this you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That word completed is pleru. For the entire Torah is completed in one word. In this you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The question is there context here? Or is, because we know, right, there's 2 great commandments. There's loving your neighbor, there's loving Elohim. But it seems like Paul's saying, if I love my neighbor, I've fulfilled everything I have to do. Does the Bible teach us that loving our neighbor it results in actually loving God? A few thoughts. When I love Elohim, it positions me best to love my neighbor. If you read the Torah, right, and what you'll find is that what the Father requires of us as love is obedience. And even Yeshua, right? He says, if you love me, you do what? Keep my commandments. In a covenantal relationship between the greater and the lesser, which is between God and us, right? God's love towards us is seen in sacrifice, but man's love towards him is seen in obedience. That's how we prove we love him. So here's the amazing thing. When you read in the Torah, it talks about you'll be blessed if you obey, and you'll be cursed if you disobey. So if I obey God, it positions me best to love my neighbor. I don't have any other problems going on that are distracting me from being able to love my neighbor. If I'm doing what he says, I'm positioned to function in a way that allows me to love my neighbor. We get caught up in a lot of the wrong stuff, right? And I think now, especially in America, because we're just not used to a lot of what's going on, we're used to riding on easy street in America. So when little blips happen, they're like major deals to us. But you go to third world countries, the stuff we're seeing is like, they just laugh. And we joke about it sometimes as first world problems, right? We went camping for 4 days and I got in my truck to leave and hit the key and the truck wouldn't start. It's a first world problem. I have a truck that wouldn't start. That got me to go camping. These people are just camping their whole lives. You know, like, you understand what I'm saying, but we get like all bent about this stuff. Take a pay cut or get put on leave for a little while at a job, and we can't think straight. And all of a sudden, we can't help our neighbor because all of a sudden, we don't have enough to be able to. You understand where I'm going? So, to me, some of it is just we got a little bit out of order with some of this stuff. And if we're loving him, it positions us to love our neighbor right. If I'm loving him, I'm anxious for nothing because he's faithful to accomplish his word in my life. Now, if I'm not loving him, he's also faithful to accomplish his word in my life. Right? And Hebrews makes that pretty clear that he chastens those whom he loves. So if I'm getting off the street a little bit, I'm going to get a whooping to get back on the right path. Now, I don't care what you think about what that looks like. You have to understand that that's what a good father does. I don't know anybody in their right mind who's in the midst of a whooping that wants to help their neighbor. I have met some people, and I'm not this kind of people that would take a whooping for someone else so they didn't have to. I know some siblings that grew up in a home that they would stand in the way and take a beating for their brother so their brother or sister didn't have to. That's not like ingrained in me to be that way. There's an aspect of love there. An act of love toward Elohim is an act of love toward the neighbor and vice versa. How do we know that? Go to 1 John 5. Everyone who believes that Yeshua is the Messiah has been born of Elohim. And everyone who loves the one bringing forth also loves the one having been born of him. By this we know that we love the children of Elohim, when we love Elohim and guard his commands. This morning in Bible study, if you were there, you remember I talked about the Father really only requires two things of us. And they're two Hebrew words. It's the word Shema and the word Shamar. That's all we're required in covenant with him. Shema means to hear and obey, and Shamar means to guard. So we have the responsibility when we come into his kingdom through covenant to do what he says in the kingdom and to protect the kingdom by doing what he says. Right? Those are really the only two things, which we just talked about how our love towards him in covenant is obedience, right? So if by this we know that we love the children of Elohim, when we love him and guard his commands. For this is the love for Elohim, that we guard his commands, and his commands are not heavy. Well, John said that. Because everyone having been born of Elohim overcomes the world. And this is the overcoming that has overcome the world, our belief. So John is giving us a definition or a proof text, you could say, a way to prove that we've loved our neighbor. He says, by this we know. The way you're going to know that you love the children of Elohim is if you love the Father and you guard what's important to him. I'll say it that way because sometimes that goes over easier. But if we're guarding what's important to him, which is loving him and loving your neighbor, then we can guarantee we've done our job to love our neighbor. It's a proof. We talked about that. We've talked about shamar a lot. It's one of my favorite words in Scripture because it's a preserving word, right? And so back to the time of Yeshua, they were trading in the commandments of God for the traditions of men. They were more concerned about preserving their traditions than obeying God. And the problem with that is what happens over time is we lose preservation of his traditions. And that's happened a lot in the church, right? And especially, we like to rag on denominationalism a lot, right? These guys are in a denominational church, but it's no different in non-denominational. There are traditions. Word of faith, there are so many traditions in there. The holiness movement, that's all traditions. We can go part and parcel, and if we actually take some of that stuff and test it against this, we find out it's literally just man stuff. Now, there's no problem with that unless it starts to come into contradiction with this. You want to celebrate birthdays? Go ahead. There's no commandment that says you should or shouldn't. I think it's ironic that the only people in this book that did are evil. So I think that's funny. But there's no commandment that says you should or shouldn't. So two things there that need to be said. We can't make commandments about things that aren't commandments because that's putting weight on people they can't bear. The grace of God that empowers you to overcome sin is there to help you obey God, not to help you obey your pastor or to obey your favorite preacher or teacher that you watch on YouTube. It's not there it's not designed to do that. It's not there to help you obey the Pharisees or the Jews or the Christians or any of that. It's literally the empowerment of God to overcome sin is there to help you obey him. All right. We got to go back to Romans and finish because I said there were three words, right? We had filled, summed, and completion. Now, completion comes from the same family of words as the word filled. The word is pleroma. And it's the result of the action expressed in pleru. So pleru means to fill. So if I had a big vessel here and we kept pouring into that vessel and we brought it to the top, that would be pleroma. You understand? So pleru is the action of filling that. And so Yeshua says, I didn't come to destroy, I came to pleru. I came to bring it to its full measure. So let's think about this logically. Fulfillment happens in two fashions, right? There are some things that get fulfilled and we never have to do them again. How many of you graduated from high school? You don't have to do that again. How many of you maybe at a job or even in a biblical setting, you took a course and you got a certificate for it? Now you can hang that on there on the wall, and half of hanging it on there is to let people know we got it. The other half is to remind us, I don't have to do that again. Right? So there's that aspect of fulfillment, but there's also the other side where you completed it now and you got to do it again. Covenantal agreements are usually like that. For example, when my wife and I got married, one of the vows that I made to her, and I still hear myself say this, was that I would take Uriah and Gabriel as my sons, and that I would treat them no differently than any other children that we have. Now, I don't get to do that yesterday, and then now I'm removed from ever having to do it again, right? You understand what I'm saying? All of you, who drove today? I even drove. I didn't walk today because I brought food. But if you drove here, you had to follow laws to get here, right? Or you should have. So if you fulfilled those laws to get here today, do you have to fulfill them again when you leave? Or there's consequences, right? The reason why we're having this conversation is because I want us to understand that fulfillment doesn't always mean the end of something. If I love God today, do I have to love him tomorrow? If I love my neighbor today, right? And so, sometimes we hope it's that way. If I do a really good job of loving this person, maybe I won't have to tomorrow. Some of them are a lot easier to love than others. If you get close to me, I'm not an easy one to love. Ask my wife. I challenge her a lot. She does a very good job, though. How about if someone else did it for you? Right? If one of you in this room kept the speed limit all the way here, does that remove the rest of us from having to? Because sometimes that's the way we teach this thing, right? Jesus did the law thing so we don't have to do the law thing. And the reason why I say that is because there's nowhere in Scripture that actually says that. What he did was died on a cross so you didn't have to die on a cross or in a pit or by a car or by some other manner. He defeated death for you. You know how he defeated death? Obedience. Death had no legal right. According to the Torah, death had no legal right because he did nothing wrong. Anyway, I need this book. All right, so listen to this. This Romans 13. This is the Jewish annotated New Testament. So it has some commentary from a Judaic perspective, I guess you could say. I need page 314. There we are. This is the commentary on this section of Romans 13, 8 through 10. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Literally, for loving the other fulfills the Torah. Verse 9, the commandments drawn from the Decalogue. The order of these short commandments is variable in different ancient sources. Love your neighbor. Love is the fulfilling of the law. Literally, love is the fullness of Torah. Now, here's interesting. So, in Yeshua's time, there were two main camps in the Pharisees. There was the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. So, listen to this, because this is what comes out of the house of Hillel from a writing. It says, similarly stated, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn. Paul plays off of the word translated work in his choice of verb. Love does not work harm to a neighbor. Fulfilling or fullness can indicate completeness or full measure, which accentuates that Torah is not a negative category, but one with ideal values, which can be subverted instead of carried out as ideally intended. You catch that? So the commentary is saying this. Paul is making a play on the word work, that we should work no evil towards our neighbor. And that when we truly love our neighbor, we're filling up or bringing the Torah to its full measure. We're hanging it on the hinges, so to speak. Because the Torah is the Torah, whether we like it or not, right? All of this is the word of God, whether we like it or not. It's not predicated on your approval of it. But if you want it to function properly in your life, it has to be hung on the hinges of loving God and loving your neighbor. In other words, let me help you a little bit. This book is not about you. This is not a book for self. And don't try and twist my words. What I mean is, this book is not about helping you get to your end that you want to get to. This book isn't designed to make you rich so you can sit there in your pretty house with your nice car and your beautiful wife and children and go, I'm living the American dream. Because according to this book, anyone who tried to do that, it became challenging for them to enter the kingdom of God. And the young rich ruler who says to Jesus, he asks him, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? He says, keep the commandments. He says, I did. All of them. And Jesus says this, he says, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. What did he do? Went away mad. He went away angry because he missed the whole point. I think you understand what I'm saying. Now, does God want a better version of you? Yeah, because a better version of you is one that's functioning in his will. But this thing ain't about patting your ego. This isn't about making sure you never take a nick, a bump, a dent. This isn't so you get the house you want, the car you want, all of that stuff that you think you have, which is really American thought. It's to make sure you love him and you love your neighbor. And if he has to give you a car so you can love your neighbor, then he'll give you a car so you can love your neighbor. But the crazy part is he could give you a car and you could never love your neighbor. Well, you got to understand, he takes all the risk in the covenant. You took no risk. And especially in America, like to say Jesus is my Lord, the risk is like paper thin. You do it in another country, there's more risk. But he took all the risk. Right? While you were yet sinners, Christ died for you. While we were useless, worthless, hopeless, lost, incapable of accomplishing his will, he still chose to send his son to offer us covenant. Took all the risk. And gives us freedom and liberty. Freedom from oppression, right? And we talked, was it last week I said this? What do you get freedom from? Tyranny and oppression. The tyranny and oppression of sin and death. And he gives you liberty. Can you imagine? You imagine making an arrangement with someone so they could do whatever they wanted? That's like going, who wants to be brave? Anybody want to be brave? Alex wants to be brave. Alex, ballpark for me how much debt you have. Ballpark. I need a bigger number because it's got to look more like death. $86,000. There's a ballpark. I was right down to the cent. $86,000. Now, can you imagine if I make an arrangement with Mr. Myers to just, here, I'm paying $86,000. Now choose to do whatever you want. You want to go back in debt? Go ahead. You want to not go back in debt and you want to follow my instructions? Go ahead. The choice is yours, but here, I'm paying it. That's what he does. Because when you're on that side of love, right? When you're the greater and you're offering to the lesser, you're taking all the risk by being sacrificial. So most of the time for us, when we're loving our neighbor, and I don't mean this arrogantly, we're in the position of the greater. Maybe we have a little bit more. Maybe there's more storage in our closet, or maybe we have a little bit more time or a little bit more ability or a little bit more understanding. And so we're being sacrificial in reaching out and offering it to them. Now we have to be careful because we have to be just like him. No strings attached. Now here's the thing. When he makes that arrangement with us, there's a requirement. Salvation is free. It's a free gift. It cost you nothing. It cost Israel nothing to come out of Egypt. It cost them everything to get in the promised land. They're not the same. Cover to cover in the Bible, they are not the same. So with our neighbor, we can be the same. We can be just like he was to us with our neighbor. If your neighbor's donkey falls in a ditch on the Shabbat, what do? You go get it out of the ditch. Why? It's preservation of life. It trumps whether you should or shouldn't work on Shabbat. The Torah is scaled. Anyway. All right, completion reminds me of another Greek word, the word telos. You ever heard the word telos before? It's translated as end a lot. We got to go to 1 Timothy. Telos was the word used to describe I don't know, what were the Greek games called before the Roman Olympics? I forget what they were called. But in the Greek games, when they had a race, telos was the word that they used to describe the finish line of the race. So 1 Timothy chapter 3. I'm sorry, chapter 1, verse 3. If you beat me there, just wait. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3 says, As I appealed to you when I went into Macedonia to remain in Ephesus in order to command some not to teach differently, nor to pay attention to fables and endless genealogies which cause disputes, rather than an administration of Elohim, which is in belief. Now the goal, or the telos, of this command is love from a clean heart, from a good conscience, and sincere belief, which some, having missed the goal, turn aside to senseless talk, wishing to be teachers of Torah, understanding neither what they say, nor concerning what they strongly affirm. So here's the point I want you to see here. Paul says, and this is his command to Timothy, right? He gives Timothy an order to stay in Ephesus, make sure no one changes the doctrine. That's the essence of what he says. And then he says, the goal of that, the purpose of that, the telos of me giving that command to you, Timothy, was love. And he says these three things: from a clean heart, from a good conscience, and sincere belief. That made me think of the Sh'ma, where we're to love Elohim with all our heart, with all our being, with all our might. Paul does it with a clean heart. He does it with a good conscience. Your conscience is part of your soul, right? And through sincere belief. So it made me think that Paul is able to give this command and be adherent to the scriptures because he's doing it out of love. It lines up with the word. His intention and his motive was love. Go to James chapter 2. Let's see it again. Verse 8 and 9. If you truly accomplish the sovereign law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin, being found guilty by the Torah as transgressors. Isn't that interesting? If you truly accomplish the sovereign law according to the scriptures, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin, being found guilty by the Torah as a transgressor. Now, partiality comes in a lot of variables. I can favor you because I like you. I could favor you because I think you're the weakest. I could favor you because I think you're the most feeble. Right? I could show partiality based on your partiality is I'm viewing your situation and I'm choosing to favor or not favor you based on my view of things. Right? That's really what partiality looks like. Some of the governmental policies of our nation are based on that. They're based on partiality. I'm going to get in trouble. If you look a certain way, sound a certain way, come from a certain place, or have a certain level of income or lack thereof, you get more help than anyone else in our nation. We all right? I don't know. There's massive partiality. Here's the problem. We were talking about widows earlier, right? The American standard of who they choose to help is more about enabling than it is about helping. We're commanded to help. We're commanded to take care of widows and orphans, but there are qualifications. The fatherless, all of that. But that comes with conditions. If we're favoring somebody because of their condition, we're going to miss the point. And if we're supposed to be loving our neighbor, listen, we see this with parents all the time. We used to, when we were younger, we talked about safety nets. Now we have this new term, helicopter parenting. You know what I found is the best cure for helicopter parenting? Have more. Because you can't. You can't helicopter anymore because you can't keep up. So just have more. If you have one, you're going to helicopter forever, struggling to just let them fall off that step. I try to get my boys to go do things away from the house. Like, listen, if you want to climb that tree, go climb one over there. Because if mom sees you or I see you, I'm going to have to say don't do that. And not because they're doing anything wrong, but because there's risk. You understand what I'm saying, right? Why do I say that? Because we struggle as parents to allow our kids to suffer something from the choices they're making so they can learn. And we're doing the same thing as a nation, right? And we do it in the kingdom too. We're pacifying sin in the kingdom by permitting continual prayer lines that people coming for the same habitual problems, asking for prayer and never changing anything about their lives. That's not being a good neighbor. That's not loving your neighbor. That's enabling your neighbor. It's actually the exact opposite of loving your neighbor. I love you enough to let you get hit by that bus. And after you get hit by that bus, I will pick you up and say, hey, maybe you don't want to get hit by the bus anymore. Let me tell you, there's a way to not get hit by that bus anymore. Don't play in traffic. But half the time we're telling them don't play in traffic ahead of time. Then they get hit by the bus and we're like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm trying to teach my kids because this is the default, right? If somebody says, I'm sorry, what do you usually say? It's okay. Or that's okay. I'm trying to get my kids not to do that because I want them to understand it's not okay. If someone does something wrong, it is never okay. I can forgive you. I forgive you. That's the term, right? Not it's okay. Oh, we're doing all right on time. Got to be a little shorter for the short crowd. Loving your neighbor is accomplishing the law is loving your neighbor. And loving your neighbor is accomplishing the law. So let's get to the point. What does it take to love your neighbor? Messiah came to bring the Torah and the prophets to full measure. He literally came to show and teach us all what loving Elohim and loving your neighbor looks like. So, what does it take to love your neighbor? It takes being like Messiah. Oh, that's heavy, right? But that's what it takes. If he came and he exemplified exactly what the perfect relationship of son to dad looks like, then he's exactly what we need to be like if we're going to love him right and we're going to love our neighbor right. So I want to give you 4 things that he did that we have to do to love our neighbor. Number 1, deny yourself. Deny yourself. Yeshua said, if anyone doesn't deny themselves, pick up their cross, he can't follow me. So if we're supposed to be like him in order to love God right and love our neighbor right, then I have to deny myself. And if you haven't encountered this with loving your neighbor, I promise you will. You're going to have to eat crow. You're going to have to give up things you don't want to. You're going to have to do things you don't want to. You have to deny yourself. If you want to go where he goes and be like him, it requires denial of self. Second one, you have to walk in the Spirit. Your flesh, every time, will fail you in trying to love your neighbor correctly. When Scripture says that man did what was right in his own eyes, they were living according to their flesh. They were using their best judgment to assess a situation and choose what to do, and it always led them astray. Romans 8:4, so that the righteousness of the Torah should be completed in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. That righteousness is right living. So if I want to live right according to the Father's commandments towards my neighbor, if I'm trying to do it without the Spirit within me, I'm going to miss it every time. In other words, it's literally impossible to love your neighbor correctly without the Spirit of God. Yeshua had the Spirit without measure. You and I better walk in what we have, the measure we've been given. In 1 John 5, we found out that in order to love our neighbor, we have to guard the commands. Scripture tells us in the book of John that Yeshua, Jesus, he only did what the Father showed him to do. And he only said what the Father told him to say. We have to understand that anything more or less is sin. If we do more or less than what the Father tells us to do, if we say more or say less than he tells us to say, it is sin. And sin leads to death. So if the Father gives me instructions in how to help Miss Joy, and he says, Miss Joy needs a blueberry cake, pie, blueberry cake, where's that? That doesn't even make sense. But if I think, well, maybe a blueberry cake makes more sense, and so I don't bring her a blueberry pie and I bring her a blueberry cake, not only didn't I obey what he said, but I bring death to the situation. Sometimes we're trying to help people with our best intentions and our best motives, and we're seeing no life-giving, fruitful production from it because we're doing what we think. If we do what he says, it always produces life. Always. The book of Proverbs talks about the commandments and says they're life to those who find them. So if we're being obedient to what he's saying, I don't care who it is that you're trying to help. But if we're doing what he says, and if he hasn't said anything, then do the best you can based on what you see and hear. Sometimes it is do nothing. But I didn't want to go there because sometimes that's our default. I'm pretty sure in studying the life of Yeshua, it was very rare in what we see in the Gospels that he did nothing about someone's situation. But I can promise you, he always did the right thing. So we have to deny ourselves. We have to walk in the Spirit. We have to guard the commandments, what he's telling us to do. You preserve them against everything else. Regardless of what you're seeing going on, what he's told you is what you have to do. Because at some point, he's going to tell you to do something that makes no sense. And if you can't even do the instructions that he's giving you that make sense, you never do the ones that make no sense. Number 4, sacrifice. John 15:13. Yeshua, looking at his disciples, he says, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. So the greatest expression of love to a neighbor is seen in sacrifice. That means excuses have to go out the window. That means you can't be too busy. You can't be too poor. You can't be too rich. You can't have too many children. There's no excuse, right? The predication of sacrifice means it costs you something. It means you have to give up something to accomplish that. All right, let's go to John 13. We got 2 more pieces of scripture, and we're going to be done. Wow. It's early today, guys. I'll stretch it for you, Mr. Gray. John 13. This is the end of Yeshua's time. They're eating the Passover supper, and they're preparing to leave to go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he's leaving his disciples with some very critical words as he's approaching his death. Obviously, he knows he's going to die and be raised, but they were all very unsure of that. Washes their feet, picking up in verse 34. And I'll read it here how it's written. It says, a renewed command I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. The reason why this translation says renewed is because in Hebraic thought, the word new and renew are exactly the same. Context determines whether it's new or renewed. So if it's happened before and it's happening again, the word doesn't change in Hebrew. It changes in English and in some other languages, but in Hebrew, it's the same word. The context just determines that. A renewed command I give to you, that you love one another. And I think this, according to Scripture, is very clear that he's just saying something that's been said before. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. Now here's the kicker. Look at verse 35. By this shall all know that you are my taught ones, or disciples, if you have love for one another. If we love one another, we prove that we are students of the word, disciples of Messiah, taught ones of Yeshua, acting like, looking like, and sounding just like him. See, to love your neighbor as yourself is a marker of the fact that you're living according to what Jesus tells you to do. And I can say that in a whole bunch of different ways, according to the word, right? He's the word made flesh. You're living according to the agreement in the covenant, because he comes to mediate the covenant between us and God. So it's my proof. It's not proof to me. I don't need proof that I have relationship with the Father. I don't need proof that Jesus died for me and that my sins have been forgiven. I believe that wholeheartedly. But it proves to everyone around me that I belong to him, that I've chose to make him my master by being willing to love my neighbor. Yeshua's love for his neighbor cost him his life. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for his friend. And so I have to wonder that if our loving our neighbor has never cost us anything, have we been doing it right all along? I said this at the beginning, but I'll say it again. If you haven't read this Torah portion, and I didn't even tell you where it is, Deuteronomy 21:10 through 25:19, I would really suggest you do it. As you look at the commandments that are listed there, you'll realize every one of them requires self-denial. Every one of them requires walking in the Spirit. Every one of them requires sacrifice. Every one requires that we guard it in order to accomplish the goal of Scripture, which is to love Elohim and to love our neighbor. One more place, go to 1 John chapter 4, and we're going to end with this reading. 1 John 4, starting in verse 11. It says, "Beloved ones, if Elohim so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has seen Elohim at any time. If we love one another, Elohim does stay in us, and his love has been perfected in us. By this we know that we stay in him, and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. And we have seen and bear witness that the Father has sent the Son, Savior of the world. Whoever confesses that Yeshua is the Son of Elohim, Elohim stays in him, and he in Elohim. And we have known and believed the love that Elohim has for us. Elohim is love. And he who stays in love stays in Elohim, and Elohim in him. By this, love has been perfected with us, in order that we might have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world." You know, this sermon really made me aware of 17 and even 18. There's no fear in love. I used to think that it's primarily talking about God's love towards us, but I realized it's actually not. It's talking about when we're fulfilling our responsibility of love. When we're fulfilling our responsibility of love, by this love has been perfected with us in order that we might have boldness in the day of judgment. You know, if I love God perfectly and I love my neighbor perfectly, when I stand in judgment, there is no word that can come against me. And if there's no word that can come against me when I'm standing before the judgment of my king, then I have nothing to fear. Who should men fear? Of whom should men be afraid? The one who can harm the body? Or the one who can cast your soul into utter darkness? It's really different. It doesn't mean that at moments you're not going to have, a little knee knocking or things like that. Those are tests to see, are you gonna love Elohim even if your knees are knocking? Are you gonna love your neighbor even if you're a little nervous to go up to that person? What are they gonna say? What are they gonna think? There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear because fear holds punishment. If you love Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, if you love your neighbor as yourself, there is no punishment that can ever come against you. No chastisement. Any of you ever have a child that you never had to punish? I've met people like that. They blow my mind. I needed to get whooped and whooped a lot. We love him because he first loved us. If someone says, I love Elohim and hates his brother, he's a liar. For the one not loving his brother whom he has seen, how is he able to love Elohim, who he has not seen? And we have this command from him, that the one loving Elohim should love his brother too. I saw your hand, Alex, but hear, O Israel, Yehovah our Elohim, Yehovah is one. And you shall love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, with all your might. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. How do you love your neighbor? Deny yourself. Walk in the Spirit. Guard the commandments. And sacrifice. Amen. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are so grateful. Grateful to have spent this time with you and with your people. Grateful that you've given us this appointment to meet with you. Not that we can't meet with you anytime, but this is one you've chose since the beginning. And so we look forward to it every week. And thank you for your word. May we cherish it. May we hold it firm in our being, Father. May we be brave enough, bold enough, wise enough to live according to your word always. In Yeshua's name.